Hello, everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I'm your host, Arden, and I'm so delighted today to have Darth Plato here with us. You guys are, of course, recognize him as a longtime PGS member, but he is here with us to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. We're going to be reviewing the film. We're going to be talking about a lot, and it's such a pleasure to have you here, Darth. And I'm just going to play the promo, and we're going to be right back. Okay, we are back. Darth Plato, it's such a pleasure to have you here on the channel.
Well, thanks for having me. Good morning, RM, Positive Fandom, PGS, and whoever else may be watching.
Absolutely. It certainly is, this community that we have with the PGS, it's very special. And, as you know, you already know a lot about me, but since it's your first time on the channel, Darth Plato, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself before we start the review?
Where I spent several years as a graduate student, basically dealing with state interaction. That includes diplomacy and war to some extent. So this is something like the All Quiet on the Western Front, kind of right up my alley. I also have a soft spot for comics, so that's why I watch Robert Myers Burnett.
Absolutely.
Star Trek, sci-fi, all that stuff. I'm writing a sci-fi story myself. It's been going on for quite some time now, and I found advice from Robert and other people as very helpful. And I'm very appreciative of that. And to you, so I think the Positive Fandom is one of the best shows on the internet, precisely because of the positivity that it brings compared to other channels, which seems to be more of a slap the knees and locker room mentality and how to deal with things. So I think that your channel is very mature, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for the kind words. That does mean a lot to me. I work very hard to have positive fandom out there and really just to give another perspective on things sometimes, um, so that people can get an idea of some just different views, differing views often. So thank you. That is so nice of you. Now, obviously, we are both here. You and I have been chatting. We do chat, quite frequently. And, we're here to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. It's probably one of the most popular and well known books about World War One. And, there's a lot to say about the book in general. I have not read the book. From what I understand, it's on a lot of people's, high school or grammar school curriculums where they must read this book. I know I had choice of books and I didn't choose that one, but it still doesn't detract from the significance of the book. What do you know about, what is it about the book? Have you read it? And is there anything significant about the book for you?
Well, I read it 35 years ago, back when I was in high school. It wasn't significant to me at the time, but since that time, it's uh, it's significant because it's talking about a time period that I think is probably most pivotal for the modern era. The world before World War One and the world since that time is well, it's marked for a lot of reasons, but the World War One is certainly one of those things. Now, that's the political aspect of the effect of the world. As far as the individual experience of the war itself, it's really unique. Sometimes people might be think that All Quiet in the Western Front, I'm talking about the movie now, is it's a war movie. It's not actually a war movie so much as it's a World War One movie. And you could clarify it even further by saying it's a Western Front movie because the war was very different on the Eastern Front than it was on the Western Front. The Italian front probably more closely resembled because there was an Italian front also, and you see that in like Farewell to Arms. If you ever read that book, it deals with that's where that's set. It's not set on the Western Front. So the Western Front was marked by trench warfare, very little movement, whereas in the Eastern Front it was much more mobility, a lot of shifting, a lot of moving around. They weren't hiding in the trenches for days, weeks, and months at a time.
Yeah, that's really important to understand that. And certainly with the title, they want us to focus, excuse me, on one specific area. And I think that that also has some significance. And if you hadn't mentioned what you just did, I wouldn't have known that. And I'm so glad you did mention that, because certainly we do get a sense when we first see, this adaptation, which is on Netflix. And it came out about a month or two before Remembrance Day or Veterans Day here in the United States. The film starts off quite jarring, with scenes
Yeah.
of soldiers who have perished on the battlefield, along with the notion of them, doing things that do happen during war, and these sort of activities that are not necessarily spoken too much about, but we know exist. For example, gathering, people who have perished, and,
Mm.
obviously somebody has to do that. They have to keep a record of soldiers that have fallen, things that are almost somewhat unspeakable, or should we say, are not often talked about, but are realities of war every day. So I think, in a sense, when we see these activities, it is important to acknowledge that someone has passed and someone has to do this
Mm.
when a battle takes place. So there is definitely something to that. And then, I kind of sent you some notes about what we could kind of look at in the film. And to be honest with you, I think in this particular film, because it's longer than 2 hours, and rightfully so, there's a lot to put into a story like this. I did just want to mention that this is a German production, and the original book is a German book, correct,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Darth?
Yeah, it's
And
written by a man named Marca.
right. And so it just so happens that Netflix, thank goodness, decided to make the film. Sometimes you see these films and they're in German, which is fantastic too. They have subtitles. But in this one, they decided to dub it in English. And I know that for many film, purists, they always say watch it in the original language and read the subtitles. But for me,
I did. I did watch it in the German.
you did watch it in German. Did you watch it in English as well?
No, I just watched it in the German.
It does lose some of excuse me, when you watch it and it's not in German, it does lose some of the cultural feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that is also something that when you go into Netflix and you have a choice, you might want to consider watching it in German. I have actually watched this film, not this particular production from Netflix, in German, because it was not available with English, with an English dub. So I have seen a version of this film in German, and it is very different. And I do want to also point that out. But they were very kind to let the rest of us who cannot read subtitles as well, the option of English. So, we do see some tropes that seem to be very common when it comes to young soldiers. And I do want to mention that this, am I correct, Darth, that this is the story of a young, inexperienced soldier, correct?
Mm. Oh yeah, he's right out of school.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of significance to that, because it seems in this story we do see the situation where he kind of, it implies, I'm not quite sure whether it coincides with the book, but it's implied that he does, kind of sign his own papers so he can go and enlist. My grandfather did that so he could actually fight in World War I as well. It was pretty common. What do you know about stuff like that, Darth Plato, in regards to soldiers who, if you're not recruited, because I don't really know the statistics from country to country, but it seems like this happens quite often.
We're lying about you ready to get into the war. I suppose it happens a lot. I don't. I don't actually know. I'm not sure anyone really knows that, but we do know people will falsify them who they are to get into war for whatever reasons. Sometimes women will disguise themselves as men so that they can get into a war to get like a signing bonus, and then they leave. That's been known to happen.
Wow.
So people will sign up for any reasons. As far as this guy, I don't think he wasn't doing it for that reason. He was obviously doing it because he wanted to do his part for Germany. Now, I'm going to mention this, and it's not in the book, but it should have been. because a man like Remarque should have known this. But so I'm not sure why he doesn't mention this. But in Germany at the time, talking about World War I, this was cast as a war of survival, as it was everywhere else in Britain and France. That this had to be done, or else the unthinkable would happen. It was absolutely cast in terms of this must be done because we must survive. And you don't really get that sense from Remarque's writings. He obviously is writing after the fact, where he has seen his memory of the word very different from how it was cast during the wartime itself. And I think that does color his recollection when he's writing his story, unfortunately.
So then, would you say that perhaps this movie and perhaps the book have more of a sense? They're more focused on being showing the horrors of war, being I'm not going to say anti-war, but a protest against the horrors of war, versus being historically accurate.
I think that's very likely, yes. It's hard to really, none of us can really fathom what it must have been like to be in a war like that, World War One on the Western Front. It's really just boggled the imagination. So all we can really do is just take them at their word, and we can't gainsay him. If he said this is what he experienced, then I don't doubt it. The
And I think that you're kind of making a good point here, Darth, because certainly we do read a lot of history and history books and things of that nature and watch documentaries, but getting the point of view of an individual, that individual experience, is going to be something that is may not concur with a lot of what we see written down historically, or that is sort of when they try to summarize the entire event. I think that this is very interesting to see this young soldier's um, experience here, and I think that that is incredibly important. We do see films like this. I mean, I guess Platoon might be the one that makes me feel, or reminds me of this a little bit. It's not exactly the same, but the Charlie Sheen character, where he's kind of gets introduced to everything. And of course, as a soldier after basic training, and I don't even know whether this kid had basic training in this story, but it feels like they were just kind of thrown into everything. And the realization of, even one of the characters says, "This is not exactly what I envisioned."
which Germans were more extensively trained than Americans today. In those days, Germans trained where it was mandatory 2 year service for everybody between 17 and 45.
So that's interesting because in the story we do see like a section, and I'm not going in order because it's impossible for us to really do this, but there's a section where there are young recruits that are missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, oh, okay, so not everybody is necessarily in one location there, and an unfortunate situation happens to them where they are exposed to gas and they perish. But it certainly does make a point. We see some other things that are, I guess, is on the list of unspeakable things, having to get uniforms and reuse them, which is not a shocking thing there.
Well,
um,
just to be clear, the front itself went from the Swiss border all the way to the North Sea. So it went the entire length of North South Europe.
Right, right. And that's just such an unfathomable line of, having to deal with a front that has that length. And
Mm.
from what I understand, Darth, this story started towards the end, like maybe the end part of the war, 1917.
No, the
Um,
book doesn't say. The book does not say when these occur or where these things occur. It just throws it at you. It's monotony is a common theme in the book. Just the general helplessness of being where they are and what they're stuck with. Thing. It's I wrote this down. The author himself says this, and I quote: "The book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure, for death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it." End quote. Uh, it's just telling the story of a generation of men that even if they escaped alive past the war, they were still destroyed by the war. That's probably true. No, that's true in other words as well. But the utter scale of it here is like is what I was saying before. It boggles the imagination. It
Yeah,
does.
I think
It does not focus on stories of bravery, but rather views the conditions of the soldiers themselves. Not that's something the TV movie really hammers at you is looking at how they're living and what they look like while they're living. It's very muddy, very it's not maybe not quite so bloody so much. It's just muddy and dirty and how awful it must have been there day in day out. I already said monotony. The artillery. Oh, the artillery must have been the worst part because it just comes down on your head and it was just incessant and it wouldn't shoot. It. I messed up my camera.
no, I'm so glad you mentioned that because
It's,
clearly that's such an important part of the story. And, I think that when people think about war films, there's a lot of things that go through their mind, and perhaps the conditions aren't exactly one of those things that is focused on. So I think that it's important for the viewers, and of course, many of you who are probably have watched more war films than anyone else. Many of you are well versed in this, but I think it is really important because, in a sense, for someone like me or for someone who has not read everything out there about it, I think it's really important to understand that there is that sense of the conditions and what it's like, and trying to understand what these conditions are like. It's not the easiest thing to recreate. We can see, I'm just showing some shots of from the film here with
yeah,
the cast. Um, and I think that they did an excellent job, not just showing the conditions as you mentioned. Here's a perfect example of what you were talking about, Darth Plato, where he's kind of sitting there or standing there, excuse me, and you can actually see that there might have been a bullet that hit his helmet. It
hmm.
is quite jarring. It doesn't look comfortable. Here they are in the rain, and
Actually, there is a visual clue that this is taking place after 1916 because the helmets they're using what's called a style helm.
okay,
Before that's right. Before that, they were using what was called a pickelhaube, which is where they had the spike on the top of the helmet.
yes.
So the fact that they're not using that tells me that it's after 1916.
Okay. And so, and this is pretty significant in a sense because, and we are going to talk a little bit about um, the individuals that, let's say, the negotiators. And when I say that, I mean the individuals who are going to be discussing, whether there's going to be a stalemate or whether there's going to be a ceasefire.
Oh, they
And
were definitely a stalemate. Yeah, the entire war was a stalemate. That's that's. I mean, it would take a while to really unpack that, but the Western Front really was just one giant stalemate. No one could move forward or against each other. People would just die. Also, they shouldn't have included. I disagree with the movie. They should not have included that scene. They should have just showed the entire movie from Paul's perspective. They shouldn't have gone off to the side and showed the negotiation at all. I don't think.
so, do you think that they were trying to? Because I know sometimes when they do these new adaptations of a film, especially something as well known and profound as this book, that they wanted to add something new to it. And there's a strong, I think, pressure on filmmakers to add something more nuanced, more um, special to their film than previous adaptations. But I don't think that in many of these, let's say in this particular case, a war movie, that it's absolutely necessary to do that. What do you think, Darth Plato?
I couldn't gainsay that really. I mean, I don't know why they chose to include that extra material with the negotiation. I just don't think they should have included it.
Yeah,
In
and
this
I
in this particular case, if you're speaking more broadly of movie making in general, I don't know. That'd be a better question for Robert.
well, yes, okay, fair enough. Um, yes, and so here we're seeing a lot of things. This is one of the recruitment scenes where the soldier is kind of lined up inside, and as you said, he's going to go for his training and continue on. None of these pictures are out of order, but I did just want to mention, I personally think that a lot of this film was pretty extraordinary in regards to its production value. Um, and you mentioned something about the helmet, so you know that it was at a specific era or time in the war. I'm impressed upon a lot of things, in particular, this group, and it initially starts off with this group of four young men who were friends, and they all enlist at the same time. I don't know whether there was a draft. I don't know anything about this, whether there was a draft at the time, but they enlist all at the same time, and eventually they all succumb to.
They didn't need a draft. It was just understood that everyone had mandatory service. It was the same
Really?
way. It was the same way in France.
So what you're saying is that they went to the enlisted, they went to the place where you sign up and just signed up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
It was
my
just it was just it was just, it was just understood. It's not
wow.
it's not like modern day America at all. There's nothing like the modern day.
Well, I always thought that there were drafts in other countries, and I guess I could be wrong on that. Um, in that sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if the British did. The British might have drafted. They might have done that. I don't know how the British organization for war was. America didn't. I don't know if the America drafted in World War I. They may have. They were putting in a
They
division a
did
day.
actually. Oh no, I'm thinking of World War II. So I don't know World War One. I'm totally ignorant, and I
Well,
apologize.
the reason why very quickly, the reason why they had a draft in World War II is because everybody was signing up for the Navy because they wanted to fight the Japanese, and Washington wanted to get people into the army because they were going to send the army to Europe to fight the Germans, and people didn't want to fight the Germans. I don't want to fight the Germans. I want to fight the Japanese, and that's kind of one of the reasons why they did that. And the ratio of volunteer to draft was about 70% to 30%.
Hmm.
Whereas in Vietnam War, it was did I get that backward? I think I got that backwards. It was 70% draft and 30% volunteer for the Second World War, whereas in Vietnam it was 70% volunteer and 30% draft. In World
Wow,
War One, in World War One, I don't know what the figures were,
that
but
certainly is a huge difference in just intent in the sense. But we kind of we do see somebody in the beginning of the story after this young man enlists with his friends, and he's giving them this I guess pep talk and about how things are. And I thought during the pep talk, the notion, I guess everybody does think this, why didn't they warn them a little bit more about what was at stake? Because this picture right here is certainly, I don't think, what most people had envisioned or even knew about at that time. How many people actually did know about these trenches at the time, Darth Plato? Do we know?
about what if that's what it actually looked like. I don't.
Yes.
I assume so. We have plenty of pictures, and now that is what they look like. There's film of World War One. There's actually a very good documentary done recently that shows World War One footage that's restored in color, so it looks like it was filmed in the '60s, and
Yeah.
it's really and it does look like that.
So in this time of 1917,
Yeah, about
would
that.
the average person have known that this is what the Western Front looked like?
In terms of the visual, sure. Whether the average person at home knew it, probably not. People probably didn't know anything about what war looked like until the Second World War, when people would go to theaters and see the newsreels. That's how people got news about the war. They go to the theaters and watch the newsreels. As far as Vietnam, it probably changed that forever. Closer to where we can just sit on TV, turn on the TV, and you can see footage of the war. That really started with Vietnam, and that really changed perception of war for people in a way that I don't think is positive. But this is a different time. What we want to know.
Yeah, and some of these shots are actually like the location. I think you can see the boom there, focusing on the soldier here. When I say the boom, I mean the camera boom. Excuse me. Um, I think that is also very interesting because it I myself wondered, and I could see how a book like this has even greater significance. I don't know. Do you know what date the book was written?
I think it was the late 1920s. I don't recall exactly. Probably about 28, 29, 1930, somewhere in there.
It's very interesting because, I know that this war, since it was so devastating,
Yeah,
um,
actually, that makes me think of something. If it was written in 28, 29, Uh, and I remember, sir, I was quoting the author earlier where he says, and I'll say for again, the book is meant to be neither an accusation nor a confession. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think what he might have meant by that, he doesn't come out and say it, but I think he's referring to Nazi rhetoric at the time. The Nazis weren't in power at that time, 2930, but there was a lot of talk about who was responsible for the war and how it ended, and this idea of the November criminals and the stab in the back, this myth that Hitler was perpetuating, even by that time. So he may have been that may have been what he was referring to.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to kind of look at it from that point of view because I think that if the book is, as you had said, meant to give a certain point of view and maybe not necessarily what people would normally assume for a particular, the conditions is what you said they wanted to focus on. I think that the movie certainly captured that, if that's what the author intended. What are your thoughts about
I
the
think the honestly, I think the author was trying to figure it out himself. He probably, I think it's obvious that he experienced something that he could barely put into words, and this is his attempt to try to get it into words. Uh, right, going home and trying to get your mind around it, and sometimes the best way to do that is just to write about it. There was a lot of World War II veterans like that too. After the war ended, the number of people that went into writing increased by 30%. So,
wow.
so I think that may be what he's doing. He's trying to get his mind around what happened, and he's only experiencing it from the point of view of a grunt. I have an advantage because I've read the diplomatic blow by blow of everything before, during, and after. He didn't have access to any of that, so he's just going there like, my God, what is this? You're just getting it completely as raw. He's trying to express that. I went there. This is what I saw, and he's just trying to just relay that to us, and that's really what he's doing. He's trying to make sense of it himself. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So you were saying, yes, he was trying to relay a message. And I think that's very important to understand as well. And it is true that we do have we have an advantage now with all the wars that we are able to freely kind of study and get information from that wasn't there. I also wanted to ask, is this the first time that we really saw French warfare in a film, or in a story, so to speak, in an actual war? Was it common before this, or was this the first time that that had ever happened?
The first time whatever happened.
French warfare.
Oh yes, the way it happened in World War I. Absolutely, that's what I was trying to say before about it's not a war movie; it's a World War I movie because there was nothing anything like it before. Since there are elements that you see in the war that you do see in other wars, like like the beginning where they're gathering the things of the dead. That's true in every war. That if you've ever seen Les Miserables, they do that there too in the novel and the book. But that was very different. Usually in the past, armies usually had like a camp followers where they would follow the camp, and sometimes there were people that just wanted to just see what was going to happen. Sometimes they were family members that traveled with the army for whatever reason, and a lot of these people were just there because they wanted to loot the battlefield after the fact. So what you see in All Quiet on the Western Front, that early part of the movie is rather than just have people just show up and loot the dead, they just did it themselves, and it cuts down costs anyway. And by this time, Germany, the whole movie takes place from the point of view of this particular soldier who's German. So you're seeing it from a German point of view. Germany at that time had the civilian government had pretty much stepped down and yielded all authority to the military establishment, namely von Hindenburg and Ludendorff. So they were making decisions for everything. It's what they call Totalkrieg, total war. The the complete organization of the state to the prosecution of the war. And what you're seeing there at the beginning of the movie is really just another day in that machine.
Interesting. And it's also
But
very
that
interesting.
was a result of the war, not because I'm sorry. It was the
No,
result
it's
of the war. It didn't put the war into motion. Very important distinction.
certainly, and that is very important to realize. And certainly, it is also very important to realize that the trench scenes are are something that had never been experienced before. What about the tanks, Darth Plato?
It didn't
Certainly.
start that way. Yeah, when the war first started, it was a war movement. It was when the war first started, 1914. The French were preparing for German. They knew it was coming. It was a matter of where it would occur. It would occur in the Rhine area, or if they would go around through Belgium. The French were aware that the Germans were massing north and were going to go through Belgium. They were aware of that, but French High Command thought that was a feint. They thought the real river would come through the Rhine. So what ended up happening? This is a very long story made very short. Is, there was a big war movement in trying to keep the Germans contained away from Paris. Paris was not a war aim for the Germans, but the French treated it as it were, which is why the confrontation took place near Paris, and this ended up what was called the First Battle of the Marne, and that ended in a draw. There was no winner at the First Battle of the Marne, but it did halt the German advance, so you have to see it as a French Allied victory, and that's really where the trenches really started. There was a draw, there was a stalemate, and both sides were spent, and they were drawing up reinforcements and supplies on each side. But by the time each side was ready to move again, the stalemate had already set in, and that's really the beginning of the trench warfare.
I'm glad you pointed that out because, as you know, I've said before, just the idea of what they're doing in those trenches, the trenches feel somewhat permanent. And I've heard as well that the trenches, once they were made more or less, didn't really move forward or backward.
Yeah,
That they
really
were
not.
pretty much in that one position for a long time. Um, and I did want to also ask in the movie, in this movie from 2022, in regards to, so we know that these trenches that they built for the film look incredible. They look very realistic. It looks,
Mm,
I'm sure if we took a photograph and then looked at what they created for this film, it looks exactly or almost exactly like what historians would say was accurate. What about the tank scene in this film, Darth Plato? When we see the tank, which is terrifying, and I do want to talk a little bit about some of the more, um, let's say graphic parts of the
yeah,
film. And usually war films do have graphic parts. This is not
sure.
a surprise to us or anything like that, but this was terrifying. Can you tell us if you know anything about, the accuracy of that in this film or even in the book with these tanks? Because was this the first time we saw tanks in war?
Yeah, the book does mention flamethrowers and tanks. It does mention them, but it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't mention where this takes place. But it was known to have. The Germans were the first to use flamethrowers, and as I said before, that the Western Front was a stalemate, and both sides were trying to break the stalemate, and the flamethrower was seen as a way to do that. Now, if you if you have some kind of penetration on the front and you can get up to the enemy bunker, well, how do you get into the bunker? You can't artillery them because they're reinforced. You can't put your gun into the hole because they'll shoot you. You can't put a grenade in there; they'll shoot you. So the way they did that was a flamethrower. If they're in a bunker in that enclosed space, the flamethrower kills everyone. That's why the flamethrower was used like that.
Well, Darth Plato, I have to tell you, and I know I have spoken about the flamethrowers, and we did see there's a tank scene which I think they executed to perfection.
Mm.
Um, where honestly, the thing that surprised me the most was how many of the soldiers actually stayed in their position while the tank was coming. Because I don't know how I would react to that. I'm just gonna be honest about it. These men were incredibly brave, honestly, to just be there and deal with this. But
Well, they
the
weren't a very reliable weapon. There was a 76% breakdown ratio for tanks, so they weren't very reliable. But when they did work, it was really a terror weapon. They were used again. They were used to break the stalemate. It was a static weapon. It wasn't like World War II where you had sorry, I don't know what that was, the a war movement. This was
right,
not a war movement. It was completely static, and it was used to um, presage the infantry
exactly.
to soften up the enemy for the infantry to come in. That's what was going on in that scene. So
Exactly.
as soon as you see the tank, you know the infantry is coming up behind them.
And I'm so glad you explained that, especially to, someone like me. And many of you watching probably already know all these details, but I am so glad that you're here, Darth Plato, to explain that because, at some point, I myself am, I knew that there would be certain things I would see in this movie, but the question always is, well, why is that happening at this moment? So you explained that so well. I felt that that scene was incredible. And I think in regards to their production value, that wasn't the easiest scene to film. But it felt like you were in the trench with them, which I love that they did that perspective. Darth Plato, I'm still shocked. I'm still appalled by all the horrors, especially the flamethrower. Now, I've spoken to you about this. I've sent you messages about this flamethrower. I didn't know that they used flamethrowers on soldiers. I knew that they existed, Darth Plato, but I had no idea. It still really bothers me.
There's
Um,
a there's a similar scene in Saving Private Ryan early in the movie when they first storm in the beaches. They use a flamethrower in the bunkers because how do you get? There's no way to get into the bunker except with a flamethrower.
yes, but you're right. You're absolutely right. And I have seen it in World War II movies. I have seen them use flamethrowers. Um, I guess for when I looked at this film and I saw the soldiers kind of like looking at one another, it looked like they could see the other soldiers and kind of like shooting the flames directly at them. I was very surprised to see that anyway. So I did want to mention that I've seen photographs of it in black and white, Darth Plato. They're black and white photos. Um,
And color. They've been restored in the color as well.
they have had these new colorized photos, but I'd seen the photos before, Darth Plato, and they're very clear. They're clear. I'm showing you what happened. Someone took a photograph of soldiers using flamethrowers during World War I, but this one really tore at me. In the film, what did you think about the depiction of the use of flamethrowers in this film?
I don't know what to think about it except that that probably is how they were using it was accurate. What it actually looked like, what it does to a body, how people reacted to how do you react to being on fire? I don't know. I've never been on fire before. Um, it's probably very accurate. I saw a video of a Buddhist monk setting himself on fire in the Vietnam era, and he showed no reaction to it. So I don't know. I don't know how you're supposed to react when you're on fire.
Right, right. I mean, in this particular depiction, everybody who's watching, of course, the soldiers it was horrific for them. And I think that they captured that element of it. And I think that for the filmmakers, they do deserve some sort of recognition for certainly capturing those moments that must have been absolutely harrowing for those soldiers going through that at the time. We did see another situation where soldiers had lost their lives to gas. um, and here, I just wanted to kind of talk about this article briefly, that has to do with the production team using a wide format to capture the hell of war. James Friend is here. It says the cinematographer. He said he was a fan of the 1930 version. And so there have been many iterations of this film made, and the 1931, I guess, might be considered the best one. I'm not quite sure which one is the best one, but so Edward Berger asked James Friend to work with him on this, and he had not all. He's also hadn't read the book. We're adapting the novel, not reimagining the movie. He says so. The idea of testing the actors and their skin tones and the costumes to see how it would work is very important. But also, the idea about using these wide format cameras, traditionally reserved for Lawrence of Arabia epics, and that the actual cameras punctuate portraiture and close-ups. They're normally considered tools for shooting vistas in big mountain ranges. Do you think it worked in a film like this when you were watching it?
Um, I would say yes. I haven't really thought about it in terms of Lawrence of Arabia, but that's actually an interesting comparison. I think that's probably true.
Mhm. I agree. I think it does make a difference seeing it in this wide format, certainly giving you a greater scale and making you feel like you're more immersed in this experience. Here it says, not only did that help Friend bring those moments to life when he was running down a trench for a scene, it also punched up the close-ups. It became apparent during the dinner scene between the general and his second command, when we move the camera into the actor's path, we got this IMAX like quality field of view and resolution. So I think that that is really interesting in the sense that they were able to recreate what I would say certainly does feel like a greater field of view, perhaps more realistic, and perhaps giving the audience a greater experience in understanding how you're going to go ahead and recreate this.
Okay.
Another, did you have anything else you want to say about that, or
Well, they mentioned the part about the German officer in the rear. I know one of the articles does mention that. This could be another instance of where the author is really speculating about what happens. I doubt that he saw that with his own eyes. Now, the officer, the highest ranking officer, did stay behind the line. That's true, but there's a practical reason why that was. That is that you have valuable personnel. You don't want to throw them away casually. It's not an era. It's not an era where generals were expected to lead from the front. That was definitely a thing in the past, where it was considered very unseemly not to lead your own battles. But in this era, they didn't do that. You had to stay behind the front. So it was just part of how the reality was. Whether or not the guy was sitting there having lavish dinners with the most expensive wine, I don't think he knows that. I think he's just assuming that that's the case. Because that, what do rich people do? Well, they have expensive meals and expensive wine, and he's just assuming that that's what's going on there. And I'm not so sure that's really what happened.
yeah, it is something to think about when we see these adaptations, and certainly there a lot of these uh, cinematographers and directors are given a little bit of an artistic license, which they will take in these adaptations. And,
Mm.
since this film certainly is gotten a lot of attention now, it did come out on Netflix. So I don't know whether it was in the theaters in other countries, but here in the United States, you could easily go ahead and watch it on Netflix if you want to. And they're talking about Oscar attention. And, I think that this film and the performances could be Oscar worthy. But it's interesting because in this article, they talk about foreign language films still struggling to get US Oscar voters' attention. And we've seen some remarkable films. I know that this film, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the best films I've seen this year, regardless of its historical accuracy. Um, RRR is another one, an
Yeah.
Indian film that was mentioned. What do you think about this, Darth Plato? Do you think that the fact that a film may be in a foreign language, um, that these Oscar voters won't even look at it? I'm surprised by this. I don't think it matters what language the film is in. What do you think?
Honestly, it sounds like snobbery. I could be wrong about it, but that's just the general impression I have as someone who's completely on the outside looking in. It sounds like snobbery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I saw RRR. I like that movie. Obviously, I've seen On Quite Working Friend. There's other movies listed there. I haven't seen those other movies, so I can't speak to that.
Right. I haven't seen the other films either. I think one of them is Close. It's a Belgian film. Holy Spider, Saint Omer, as well as obviously the film that we're talking about here, and talking about the idea of them only since 2020, where Boon Joon-ho's Parasite won. Um, their other films struggle to make it outside of the Best International Feature Film category, which is very interesting. And they talk about how many professionals are in the Academy. Obviously, we've had a lot of articles about this, but certainly, I think it's something to think about going forward. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the best things that they could do, at least what I think they should do all along, is just make more categories. Um, if they're so that way that you can have more opportunities for people to win. But it's just an idea. I don't know whether that would work. The final thing that I wanted to say is that one of the writers on the film happens to be an athlete, and it turns out
I
that
saw
they
that.
are an Olympic. I sent you that one, right? Okay. An Olympic athlete certainly is very interesting there. So I just want to show that one um, briefly. It's about Leslie Patterson, the writer. Here she is. She is an athlete here, and it says from gold medals to Oscar buzz, the writer says sports and script are closely related. There she is. Congratulations to her for not only Olympic wins, but also for this. And it says she competed 15 years as a pro and 5-time world champ. It's very interesting to see someone who is a screenwriter for a film and also be an athlete like this.
That's very, very
Certainly
well rounded.
very well rounded. Um, and she says, in both fields, self analysis is critical to success. It's molding and crafting. Being a triathlete is a form of meditation. You spend hours on your own, and a lot of creative juices come from that. So it says that Western Front is Germany's international film Oscar entry. It's also getting buzz in other categories, including screenplay adaptation by obviously Patterson, Ian Stokell, and director Edward Berger, working from Eric Maria Remarque's classic. I and also I imagine maybe it would even win for cinematography, which we were just talking about, since they chose to use that wide angle, and it really did give such an incredible view there. So certainly this film has some incredibly talented people who worked on it, and I think that the ideas of using that wide angle, the wide angle shots certainly made a big difference in this film. It's something that I think we ought to see maybe perhaps in films that have a scope like this, where it's important to see, the topography, even if the topography is as bleak as it is in this film. So, there is an advantage. It doesn't always have to be a stunning landscape that can benefit from that type of photography and filming. So that is something that I definitely take away from it. What are your final thoughts about this adaptation of All Quiet in the Western Front? Would you recommend it, Darth Plato? And what were some things that you really enjoyed about this film?
Well, what I enjoy about it, what I recommend about it, is really this. It's really the same thing. Is that I look at movies as an opportunity for discussion. I don't really see it as I want to caution. I don't really see it as an action movie. A lot of people, war is not action. This is again, this is a World War I movie, not a war movie, and I'm very familiar with how World War I went down, more for the diplomatic blow than anything else, and it's just a good lesson. It's like what we're doing right now. It's an opportunity to discuss the movie and what really happened, and that's really what I'm most grateful for the people making the movie. Thanks for putting out this movie because you're generating discussion, and that's really what I'm most getting out of it, and what I'm most appreciative. And for you for letting me talk about this on the show.
Well, I'm just so grateful that you are willing to come on and talk about the film, and I hope to have you back to have many more discussions about other films as well.
Yeah,
Darth Plato.
I wanted to okay, well, I wanted to mention, if I can, the last part of the movie, because I really don't want this to end without me saying this, is that it is a significant departure from the book, in that how they show that we've said before, the general behind the scenes are like, oh, we're not gonna end the war like this. We're gonna go in there and we're gonna hit them in the mouth, and like, first of all, that sounds like something that people who don't know anything about what happened at that time projecting into the past. Oh, he's an officer behind the line. He's Prussian, therefore he must be crazy. Prussians weren't crazy. He wasn't going to do things because he was a Prussian. It's part of this modern myth that existed now and then, that there were two Germanys. There was the Germany of the engineers and the artists and the linguists and the academics, and then there was this military Germany, this Prussian Iron Germany. And I think that's a false comparison. The reason why the German unification happened under Prussian auspices was because Prussia was monoethnic and monolinguistic, and they thought that there was an advantage to that, rather than have it being multi-ethnic, which is what you saw down in the Austrian kingdom. It was very multi-ethnic, very multilinguistic down there. That's why that happened. It wasn't a military thing, and I think that this modern projection is being put into by these movie makers, unfortunately, and you see that at the end of the scene, and it's a big departure from the book, where he just dies. It's part of the theme of the book, is that He's done. His youth has been ruined. He says in the book that uh, whatever is in the future is not going to matter because it's all been lost, and that's the theme of the story. And then he just dies, and that's one of the tragedy. He dies on Armistice Day. I think the total number of people. Yeah, you didn't see these. There wasn't fighting raging on the Western Front up until the armistice time. The fighting was already winding down because of the anticipation of the armistice. I think there was 2,700 people died on the Western. 2,700 is a lot of people, sure, but it's a very small number compared to what had been transpiring up to that point in time. You definitely did not see that crazy psycho attack at the end of the movie. I really wish they didn't do that. I know critical drinker comment on this. He thought that it was good to change the ending that they did. I could not disagree more with that. I respect critical drinker. I just think he's wrong about this. They should have just left it the way it was in the book. They didn't need to spite. There's enough action in this movie. You didn't need to have that action scene at the end, which is dumb. They shouldn't have done it. I really wish they hadn't done it. I'm going in circles. I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you shared that. I haven't watched other YouTubers' reviews of this film, so you're really the only one I've spoken to about this film in detail, Darth Plato. So you're it for me. Your review is the one that I'm listening to, and also, of course, my own. But I think it's very interesting, and I agree with you. It detracts from the innocence lost, um, and the sort of somber tone that is expressed at the end, where you really do feel lost, and then the life is kind of it's when he loses his life, it's almost as if he had already lost it, you know. But that gets it, you get pulled out of that with a final kind of action at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the film. You don't have that moment to reflect.
Yeah. Modern
And,
bias projected into the past. It's like, oh, they're wearing uniform, therefore they must be crazy, therefore they must be stupid. I tell that at Berkeley all the time. It's like, oh, you're into military stuff. Oh, this wouldn't be interesting to you. Like they were talking about reading Plato. And for goodness sake, that's right up my alley. And they look at me. They look at me like they just like a dog just showing a card trick. Like they couldn't process that I would be interested in that if I was interested in military stuff. Gosh darn. Take Woodrow Wilson's military advisor was a guy named Tasker Bliss. He was a uniformed general, and what he did for relaxing was reading Thucydides in the original Greek. These were very educated people. These weren't psychos looking to start a fight every 5 minutes.
exactly. And I'm so glad that you shared that. And certainly, I really do appreciate all of your views. They're incredibly helpful and insightful, especially in a honestly, even if the book isn't meant to have every specific detail, historically accurate, it certainly does bring a discussion forward, as you mentioned, as well as this movie, which I hope it gets some recognition of some kind. As far as I'm concerned, it certainly deserves perhaps some acting nominations, as well as some cinematography, and maybe even it might even be nominated for costumes. I know sometimes these military films can be nominated for things like that. So there is that. Darth Plato, where can people find you?
uh, I don't really have an external contact. I don't really have a YouTube footprint beyond being on PGS and Positive Fandom. So I guess it's just in the chat.
Okay, great. They can find you here on obviously Positive Fandom. If anybody wants to get in contact with Darth Plato, you can reach out to me and I will send Darth the message if that's all right with you, Darth Plato.
By all means,
Okay.
I
Um,
encourage it.
and for everybody here, of course, you can find me here on Positive Fandom. You can find me on the Post-Geek Singularity there as well. Sometimes the 1/6 Scale Man Network. Sometimes I stream with Lavinia Creole, and sometimes I'm on Midnight's Edge. So for everybody out there, thank you for watching this video. I've been so eager to make this review of the film because I thought it was a wonderful film. And I certainly do recommend it. I think everybody should watch it. I think they
I
did
agree.
an excellent job, and I have to give congratulations to that production team for that. Um,
I
And
agree.
guys, please do like and subscribe to Positive Fandom if you like this type of video and shows that we're doing here today. And for everybody out there, no matter where you are and what you're doing, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.